On Thursday, Ace Steel was released by AEW in the wake of CM Punk's termination last weekend, which seemed inevitable to me the moment that announcement was made. I thought he was on borrowed time. Now, release could mean anything. It could mean it was an AEW decision, or it could be that he asked for it once his buddy got fired and they were happy to grant his wish. But the way it's been reported makes it sound like it was not his decision. He was the only person fired in the aftermath of the Brawl Out fiasco last year after allegedly hitting Nick Jackson in the head with a chair and biting Kenny Omega. The entire reason they even brought Steel back with back pay was because CM Punk demanded that he get his job back and he wanted to work with him. So Tony Khan brought him back as Punk's personal producer, but he also made the decision that Steel would not be allowed at the building for Collision. So technically, Ace Steel was the first person banned from Collision. And Punk was told that Steel can work remotely, and that's what held up the announcement of his return. That's why, if you remember, the announcement was not made. It was supposed to be made at the Warner Brothers Discovery upfronts, and it was not made. It was made, I forgot how many more days later, maybe it was the following week, but it was held up because they were still working out the details, and Punk was not happy about the fact that Ace Steel was not going to be allowed at the building. So they worked it out to where Steel would be working remotely via Zoom calls. And that's where the other nonsense followed, with Punk banning Christopher Daniels, the company's head of talent relations, from Collision because he saw him as an elite guy. And if my guy can't be there, then Daniels shouldn't be allowed there either. Of course, Daniels did not physically assault anyone. It's not exactly the same thing. But in its story about this, PW Insider had an interesting little nugget at the end about there having been discussions over the past month that AEW was looking into a space in Florida somewhere for Ace Steel to train and work with talents, which is something that he did previously for WWE as a coach at the Performance Center. Obviously, that will no longer be happening. If that's true, it sounds like his friend's little outburst at Wembley may have just cost him a coaching gig too. And it's not a bad idea, AEW setting up some sort of training operation. They already have people like Dustin Rhodes and others who work for AEW who would be perfect, I think, in a role like that. It doesn't just have to be Ace Steel. So that to me sounds like an idea worth pursuing. It just will not be with Ace Steel. Now, speaking of CM Punk, because you knew we weren't going to get by 1 week without there being some talk about CM Punk. We still have not heard anything new from his side. But you know he's going to have a lot to say about this when he is ready to talk. Fightful reported that prior to All In, Punk and the Young Bucks ran into each other at Wembley Stadium. And despite people being on the edge of their seat, seeing them together, waiting to see what was going to happen, there were no issues. Bodyslam.net, in their own report, says that a source who was present during the interaction said that Punk kept the exchange brief, telling Matt and Nick, "Let's make history." Well, he certainly stayed true to his word. He did make history, just not in the way that he probably wanted to. Meanwhile, Dave Meltzer, and there's a polarizing name right there, Dave Meltzer in this week's newsletter, reported the following on the CM Punk front. That Punk himself contacted WWE a few months after Brawl Out, sometime before the end of 2022, indicating a desire to return and believing that he would get a contract buyout. Now, that was a rumor going around at the time, earlier this year, that Tony Khan might buy Punk out of his contract to get rid of him. But he ended up opting against it, and when that happened, any chance of a WWE return, however small it may have been, that went up in smoke. Meltzer said there were reports that Punk pitched the idea of going into this year's Royal Rumble and being eliminated by Kevin Owens, and then wrestling Owens in the Night 1 main event of WrestleMania, which is a story that Fightful reported this week. Now, actually, Fightful said that the name Kevin Owens was thrown around. It was not confirmed, though, by Punk or anyone close to him. Only that the idea would have been whoever eliminated Punk from the Royal Rumble, he would go on to wrestle that person at WrestleMania, whether it was Kevin Owens or somebody else. CM Punk was never going to be in the Royal Rumble. Even if he was given an unconditional release by AEW, because the man would have only been 4 months into recovery for a torn triceps. And unless he has those John Cena mutant healing powers, there was zero chance that he would be medically cleared in time for the Royal Rumble. Even WrestleMania would have been dicey. Now, as far as the Kevin Owens stuff goes, I seriously doubt that it would have been Kevin Owens, because Owens was not even in this year's Royal Rumble match. He was challenging Roman Reigns for the championship. I'm sure they had those plans locked in at least a few months in advance. And it was clear to me, months before WrestleMania, the match we were going to get, for all the people who were like, oh, Sami Zayn's got to win the title at, Elimination Chamber, all these poor saps out there who thought he was actually going to win. It was pretty clear the match was always going to be Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn challenging the Usos for the tag team titles. It was the only tag team title match that made sense. They were not going to deviate from that plan and leave Sami hanging after he lost already to Roman Reigns and have nothing to do at WrestleMania. Because he already lost, and now Owens is wrestling CM Punk. Give me a break. But it puts that Punk surprise visit backstage at Raw back in April in a very new light, doesn't it? Right? That was a ballsy thing for him to do regardless, being so close to his return in AEW. But him visiting backstage when WWE has run Chicago... I mean, how many times has this company run Chicago in the 9 years since he left and has run the Allstate Arena? And not once have we ever heard about CM Punk visiting backstage at WWE. Not once has he ever been spotted backstage, only when he is on his way back to AEW and still trying unsuccessfully to get a meeting with the Elite. And he shows up at Raw and he tries to meet with Triple H while he's there. He's making amends with people like The Miz, like he's on some kind of a fucking 12-step program. I think he was already testing the waters for a future return to WWE. He was trying to bury the hatchet with a few people, not out of the goodness of his heart, but because he was looking ahead. He was looking forward to the future, just in case. Now, Meltzer says FTR in particular had attempted to get everybody working together. There was a meeting with Chris Jericho and Punk and FTR, and that would have been the meeting that Punk was actually flying back from Florida when he went to the Allstate Arena for Raw. And another meeting with FTR and the Young Bucks. He says it is true that people in the company wanted Punk and the Young Bucks to meet, but it was never asked because of the belief that it would be turned down by the Young Bucks. Which sounds so stupid. Oh, well, the only reason the meeting didn't take place is because, what, people were afraid to ask the Young Bucks? So they never bothered asking them? Finally, it was asked for the August 23rd event in Duluth, Georgia, since Dynamite and Collision were both being taped. At the same time, AEW had informed the Young Bucks of a legal letter sent to the company that claimed that they had violated the agreement from months back to not talk negatively about the other publicly. Evidently, it was from a BTE skit that was that was a storyline that had started years earlier about Matt Jackson screwing up an endorsement deal and was brought back where he had secured another deal of some sort that was going to make them all rich, only to have that screw up, and even with their new contract, they were left broke and couldn't retire even if they wanted to, and they were all furious that they can never leave wrestling. I had to investigate this myself. I don't watch BTE week to week like some people do. But evidently that was the skit. Now, in the skit, they wanted Matt to apologize for screwing up. Punk's name was never mentioned. Now, I know that some people will automatically trash anything that Dave Meltzer says because they think he's a stooge for the Elite. But I don't think he's making up the part about a legal letter because that would be easy enough for someone to prove if Punk ever denied it. And I watched the skit in question. If that's the skit that got them a legal letter from Punk's lawyer, it's laughable. Because I watched it and I was waiting the entire time for the reference to CM Punk. Like, I didn't expect them to actually speak his name. But I thought, okay, the reference, it would be kind of obvious. There was no reference to CM Punk, unless it just went completely over my head. I watched the whole fucking thing twice and I'm still wondering, what the hell did I just watch? What was the big deal about this? This is what got them a legal letter? Now I can't get the idea out of my head that CM Punk sits there late at night combing through every frame of each BTE episode, scouring for the slightest reference to him, and then his lawyer gets an angry phone call in the middle of the night about it. Dave says all of the weekly things, like what happened to Ryan Nemeth and Christopher Daniels, and then hearing about the legal letter right before the planned meeting, led to the Bucks turning it down. I don't know if they would have agreed to it anyway, although had nothing happened for several months, they were willing to have that meeting and work with Punk. Essentially, the very phrase that I used in September about time healing all wounds probably was the case, but the clock on that time frame kept being reset each week back to zero. One person very close to the situation said the Bucks had said that if 6 months went by without any issues, they would have been willing to sit down and work with Punk. That is a convenient excuse not to meet with the man. I still say as EVPs, they should have sat down with him. I think that was part of their responsibility as EVPs in the company. If they still didn't want to work with him, then don't work with him. But at least have a conversation. By allowing this to linger for all of these months, it created a situation where it drove Punk crazy that he couldn't get in the room with these two guys. And if they did meet and they still had no desire to work a program with Punk, would CM Punk have been just as angry? Probably. I think he would have been just as angry, yes. I don't think it would have solved much of anything. If they sat in a room for 30 minutes and they were able to actually talk like adults and not kill each other, and then in the end the Bucks were like, all right, we're cool, but we're still not going to work with you. We're not interested. I'm sure Punk would have blown a gasket. He would not have been very happy about that. It sounds to me like the Bucks of youth over here, they gave this guy just enough rope to hang himself. Imagine throwing away millions of dollars and all the creative freedom that he had on his own show. They gave him his own show. Throwing all of it away for Jack Perry. How much of a head case do you have to be to piss all that away for Jungle Boy? Jungle Boy! Now, on the subject of CM Punk possibly going to WWE, Mike Johnson of PW Insider says that Punk was immediately a topic of conversation within the company within minutes of AEW making the announcement that he was terminated, especially among top talents in WWE. There were some who were adamantly against the idea of him coming back. Others looked at it as a chance to make big money. As I said last week, it's going to be an Endeavor call at the end of the day. Now that they're about to own, as of this week, the deal will close. And Endeavor will own WWE or own more of it than Vince McMahon does, right? This deal is going to open up a brand new chapter in this company's history. And in the end, it's going to be their call to make. If they want Punk, they'll make the deal for CM Punk. Punk is not going to turn down the money. And he has certainly given indicators in the recent past that he is open to doing business with WWE, whereas years ago he would not have been. That was then. This is now. And with all the things that he has said about WWE, even recently, even in recent years, all the things, all the crap he's talked about WWE, would it make him look like a hypocrite to go back there? Absolutely. Yes, it would, of course. But if WWE is open to making that deal, there's not a doubt in my mind that he would make that deal. Now, Johnson did say that there is not believed to be any sort of non-compete that would stop Punk from going somewhere else, like WWE if he wanted to. Tony Khan, when asked about that, he didn't give an answer. He was fired with cause. We know that. And in WWE, if somebody is fired with cause, usually there's a 1-year non-compete. But that's how WWE does non-competes. We don't know how those work typically with AEW contracts. And Punk's case is a special one. It's possible the fact that they terminated him for cause means that he can't then just waltz into the Royal Rumble, for example. So any talk of a WWE return is going to hinge on two things. One, whether or not he can legally sign there. And two, whether or not Endeavor wants to get into the CM Punk business. And there is business to be done. I'm not saying that if CM Punk goes to WWE, they wouldn't make a ton of money putting CM Punk in the ring with Roman Reigns or Seth Rollins or any number of people on that roster, even a Kevin Owens. All right, there's plenty of matches you could do with CM Punk. CM Punk in smaller doses where he's not on television every single week. And he's there for big matches on pay-per-view. He's coming out to Cult of Personality. The WWE audience hasn't seen him in many years because not all of them watch AEW. Right? I will tell you that I'm sure a good majority of the people who would see him in WWE would be aware of his history with AEW, that's going to follow him no matter where he goes. It is a stain on his career, the way things ended in AEW. It's embarrassing. You don't think he isn't embarrassed and pissed off about the way that whole thing went down, that he got terminated with cause? The boss of the company went out on national television and gave a whole 90-second speech about how I had to fire Phil Brooks, I had to fire CM Punk. Never in my life have I feared for my life and my safety the way that I did when I was in the presence of this man. That's why it's going to be very interesting when the day finally comes that Punk gives his side of the story and speaks out what he has to say about that. What happened with him and Tony Khan? Is he not allowed to talk about it? Were there more NDAs that were signed? Probably not, right? If they fired him, I don't think he signed an NDA. So we'll see how that turns out. But look, I'm not doubting that if Punk were to go to WWE, there's money to be made. There was money to be made doing Punk against the Elite, and Punk against Kenny Omega, and Punk against Bryan Danielson, and Punk against Jay White, and him against a whole bunch of other people in that company. All those matches that we got screwed out of, I mean, the minute that he decided to put his hands on Jack Perry, or possibly try to put his hands on his fucking boss, that was it. He was done. Finished. Even if he didn't actually get his hands on Tony Khan. If he lunged at him, if he threatened him, if he said, fuck you, and all this other stuff, and he was lunging at his boss, guess what? I don't care where you work or who you are. You're done. You're gone. We got screwed out of a whole bunch of big matches that CM Punk still could have had in AEW. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't have an interest in seeing him in the ring with some of these people in WWE, but you got to know what you're getting. His track record speaks for itself, which is why I don't think WWE is going to be all that interested in jumping immediately into the CM Punk business. If you're Vince McMahon, if you're Triple H, if you're Nick Khan, I don't see them clamoring to bring CM Punk in right away. Ari Emanuel and some of the other people that work over there in Endeavor, maybe they'll have a different viewpoint on that.